Okay, so today's lesson is going to be problem set 74, and we're going to be talking about how to translate equations using fractions, decimals, and percents. We've already talked about before what these different words mean, so I've written example 1, 2, and 3 out on the board for you. Remember that we're going to use the word of, we're going to translate it to mean times, and the word is going to mean equals. So those are important. So we're basically going to take this word, what fraction, and we're going to write WF, which stands for what fraction, times 56 equals 42. Now you don't have to spread the equation out like that. It's just directly underneath what the phrase says. So I'm going to move it closer here. Now you have a simple equation that you're trying to solve for a missing factor. So we know the inverse operation has to be used. The inverse of multiplication is division. So we're going to divide by 56. That cancels. We're going to put 56 on the right side. Now, what fraction is telling my solution has to be in a fractional format. So this is already in a fractional format. So the only thing I'm going to do is reduce it down. I don't have to do anything else. I don't want to make it a decimal. I don't want to do anything else to it. So I'm going to find out what goes into both of those. I know that 2 goes into them, so I can divide it by 2. But you want to try to find the largest common denominator so it's quicker. So I know that I can divide these by 7, and that's going to give me 6 on top and 8 on the bottom. So 6 over 8 if I divide by 7. Now I'm going to take the 6 over 8, and they're both even, so I'm going to divide those by 2. And I'm going to come up with the solution. This is important that you write this in your answer. So WF equals 3 over 4. So your solution is WF equals 3 over 4, which is in a fractional format. Now, there are some occasions when you get an answer of 6 over 1. Don't leave it as 6 over 1 because 6 over 1 is not reduced. Even if it says a fractional answer. Yes, 6 over 1 is a fraction, but 6 over 1 is not reduced, and all fractions have to be reduced. So if you come up with a case like that where there's a 1 in the denominator, go ahead and reduce it down, and it's still going to be a correct answer. Okay, in the next example, we have 75 is what decimal part of 20? In the first one, we were looking for a fraction. In the second one, we're looking for a decimal. So we're going to say 75 means equal. This time we're going to use WD for what decimal. And then we're going to say of means times and 20. So 75 is what decimal part of 20. This time we want our answer to be in a decimal. Now here's where you need to be careful because the way this is written, it's very common for people to try to, when we isolate the variable, to try to divide by 75. But remember, you have to get rid of the factor next to the variable. So one way that you can keep yourself from making the mistake of dividing incorrectly is to rewrite it by using your commutative property, and you're going to say WD times 20 equals 75. Notice that this is exactly the same thing, I just inverted them, okay? Now that makes it a little bit easier to see. I'm going to divide this by 20 because it's a missing factor. Divide this by 20. Now notice something. 75 over 20 is not in decimal format, so I'm not done completing the problem. So I'm going to divide both of these by 5. The bottom will be easy, so it's 20 divided by 5 is 4. 5, it goes into 7 once. And then I'm going to subtract 2, put it there. So 5 goes into 25 5 times. If you need to take 75 on the side and divide it by 5, that's okay as well. We're just doing short division to get the math quicker. Now we look, 15 over 4, it can't reduce further, but that's not a decimal. So in this step, you can do one of two things. You can either take the 15, and I'm running out of room here, so I'm going to have to put it over here. So you can take the 15, and you can divide it by 4. The top goes in the division box, and then you can divide it by 4. Make sure you bring the decimal down. You have 3.7, that's 28. You have to add a 0. Sorry, I messed up there. So we're going to have 2, drop your 0, and that's 3.75. So your solution would be WD equals 3, I'm going to erase this wart because it's in my way, equals 3.75. Okay? Now, if you did not want to do it that way, you can actually take 15 over 4, and you can, actually, you know what, that's to make a percent, so scratch that idea, never mind. The best way to do this is to go ahead and make this 15 and then divide it by 4. If that had a power of 10, like 15 over 10, then you would simply move the decimal over. In other words, if it said 15 over 10, because it's a 0, we would say the answer would be 1.5. Okay? All right, now, there's my decimal answer. Now let's move on to example 3. We have 3/4 times what number is 60. Notice this is what number. So what number means it can be anything, a fraction, a decimal, percent. It doesn't matter. It's your preference. So the easiest thing to do is to just leave it as a fraction when you're done. So we're going to divide. Now we have a different situation here because this is a fraction. It is not a whole number like these were. So I don't want to divide by 3 over 4. Okay? We talked about this right before the break, so I want to reiterate. Whenever you have a missing factor, you're supposed to divide. So that means I would divide by 3 over 4, like this. And I would divide by 3 over 4. But if you remember, whenever we take a number and we're dividing by a fraction, we have to flip the fraction and multiply. So this would be 60 times 4 over 3 in order to solve it. You are getting the same result by skipping the step of dividing by 3/4 and instead using the reciprocal right here. Because there's a fraction involved, you would use the reciprocal, those cancel out. Whatever you did on one side, you always did it the other, so you put this over 1, you multiply it times 4/3. You can reduce, and you're going to have 20 times 4. So Wn equals 80. This is your solution. Do not try to reduce left and right because this is not a proportion. So there you have it. You have fractions, decimals, and percents. And numbers. The main thing from this lesson that I want you to take away from is to always be sure you go back and answer what the equation is asking for, whether it be fraction, a decimal, or a regular number. Now, as far as your geometry for this lesson, looks like you guys will be able to skip out on 11B, number 16, number 17, number 18, okay, so that was 11B, 16, 17, and 18. Those are all geometry problems, and you do not have to do that. Okay, guys, we'll see you next time.